The following program is a production of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Paula Nelson. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library System, and my guest today is Paula Nelson, who is co-author of Soar with Your Strengths. Welcome, Paula. We're glad you could come be with us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I thought we'd start first by asking you to tell about the background that you have that led you to write Soar with Your Strengths.
I'll give you the quick bio. It's what I call the threes. I've co-founded three companies, three electronics companies actually, which I did while I was in my 20s. And then I authored a book called The Joy of Money. I decided I wanted to try my hand at writing. And The Joy of Money went on to sell 500,000 copies. And from there I did two other books, one of which we've been chatting about here in your stacks here at the library, Paula Nelson's Guide to Getting Rich, a title which I absolutely hated, but it did well. Good book, lousy title.
But circulated 150 copies here in our library.
Isn't that amazing? I'm thrilled to hear that, and it tells me that I've got to get to work and talk to some publishers about reissuing it and all that. So, but one of the things that happened with Soar with Your Strengths, which I co-authored with Don Clifton, who is the chairman of SRI Gallup, and he had been doing 40 years of research into the issue of basically success and what is it that is the background of performance. One of the things that I had been curious about is why is it that one of my three companies was wildly successful and another one was kind of average and another one was kind of medium successful? Why is it that my first book sold 500,000 copies? Why is it that the second one sold dramatically less than that? Why is it the third one, which is the one you have there, sold dramatically more? In other words, why is it that we have inconsistent success? And the question is, how is it that we can have more consistent success in the economy, in our educational system, personally? How is it that we can continually grow each year? And one of the things that was discovered is that if you focus on strengths and you manage your weaknesses, you can double and triple your effectiveness or your productivity. And that is if you focus on strengths and manage the weaknesses. The problem in this country is that we function exactly the opposite way. We basically function on what you'd call the weaknesses theory, which is let's fix what's wrong and let the strengths take care of themselves. And if you recall listening to any of the presidential candidates of 1992, particularly Perot was saying this the loudest, I'm going to fix it. You know, everything's gone wrong and I'm going to come in and I'm going to, what did he say? I'm going to shovel up the problem or whatever, and I'm going to fix things. You listen to Clinton, I'm going to fix things. You listen to Bush, I'm going to fix things. And most of all, people think that if we could just fix it, in effect, they think that success is the opposite of failure. Mm-hmm. Okay? If we can fix what's wrong, we will be successful. They think that zero mistakes equals success. If we can just remove all of the mistakes, all of the errors, we can have perfection. Well, what you end up with, for instance, one of the examples that I use in Soar with Your Strengths, is that if you have a letter that has absolutely no errors on it, it doesn't make it an excellent letter. It simply makes it a letter that has no spelling errors. It has no punctuation errors. When you take a look at it does not, however, make a lasting, memorable, potentially Pulitzer Prize-winning effort.
Could be technically correct,
it could be
but
technically
meaningless.
correct but meaningless. And if you take the Gettysburg Address and you run it through a spell checker on your computer, it's loaded with errors. So the point is, what really creates excellence? It's when you focus on what you do well. It's when you focus on the strengths and you manage the weaknesses. Because it reminds me of the people who are, which is one of the reasons we have great failures in diets in this country. People say, well, my life will be perfect as soon as I lose 30 pounds. People lose the 30 pounds and they go, boy, what a mess this is. I still have the same husband. I still have the same kids. I still have the same job. I still have the same terrible attitude.
I still have the same outlook on it.
I still have the same outlook. So what they do, they immediately put it back on. However, if you take people who have focused on their strengths, they haven't worried so much about instantly losing the weight, and you help them to do a lot of what they do well. If they're in sales and they have an opportunity to do a lot more of what they do well. If they're a great teacher who has an opportunity to maybe work more in her particular or his particular area, maybe it's English that they like to work in. They like to work with 3-year-olds. They like to work with 6-year-olds. You give them the opportunity to do more of what they do well. What happens is that you start to feel filled up from inside. You get to exercise something that you do well. The endorphins trigger. You start getting a response mechanism, so you want to continually move ahead, you want to continually do it. You start to feel so good, you don't have the time to think about the addiction or the negativity. It then gives you, in effect, kind of the psychic energy to manage the weakness. One of the things that Drucker says about this particular concept is that what happens is the strengths become so dominant, it overwhelms the weaknesses. Stephen J. Cannell is one of the most prolific writers and producers in Hollywood, is dyslexic, as am I. People say, well, how can you be a prolific writer and be dyslexic? Well, the two things have nothing to do with each other. Reading and writing has nothing to do with each other. I have, thank goodness, great editors. But when you get clear of the fact that if I spent my entire life trying to become a great reader, and I know you want me to read something here in a minute, which is going to make me nervous, so I'll try it. But if I tried to become a perfect reader, a perfect talking head on television, reading, not doing what we're doing here, I'd be forever a failure. I would be working in an area of weakness, and I would try to overcome that. It is, however, what we do in schools. There was a Gallup poll recently that said if your kid brought home a report card that said 2 A's, a C, and an F, which one in your wisdom about how they would become better educated would you suggest they spend their time? 84% of the parents came back and said with the F.
Because so many people feel we ought to be well-rounded.
Well, it's another one of the issues that we address in the book. And the theory of well-roundedness is the objective. The question in our society is the process. What we say is, here's cafeteria-style education. And what we want you to do is go out and have a little bit of English, a little bit of math, and a little bit of physical education, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And we expect you to excel at all of them. The truth is that we're not all cookie cutters, and we're not all the same, and we can't all produce the same results.
And many people in our educational system would say, well, you're doing great in English, you got an A there, and you're doing great in history, you got an A there. Why don't you focus your energy on Phi Ed, because you certainly are not coordinated
Exactly.
at all.
Well, I was, this makes me very emotional to talk about, but as I was growing up, because I was dyslexic, I was put back in school. And I was put back not once and not twice, but 3 times. Not because anybody happened to notice the fact that I would always get A's on composition papers, but they said, this woman cannot, or this little girl cannot diagram a sentence, so we're going to flunk her. This little girl has no idea about math, so we're going to flunk her. So of course, just to show them, I decided to write a bestseller called The Joy of Money on finance and Wall Street, and take a couple of companies public and write a few books. Now what's interesting is that if you can take a person and you can put them in their area of competence, there's a story that we use in the book about John Portman, who's the world-renowned architect. And John Portman very early on realized that what he wanted to do was he wanted to be an architect. He was 12 years old. And he had taken a graphics design course in drafting. And he loved this. And he had this clipboard, and he started walking around. He sketched buildings, and he was using his T-square and all of this, and he was just inspired by this. And so what happened is that he got the courage to go in and talk to his principal. And he said, Mr. Jones, whatever his name was, and he said, could you please help me become an architect, and could you help me organize my classes between now and when I graduate so I'll be better prepared to be an architect? And he said, young man, if you at 12 years old know what you want to be when you grow up, the least that I can do is help you to achieve that. And so he helped them do a lot of math classes, a lot of design classes, a lot of things in that area. And so people sometimes when you share the story, they say, but how could John Portman be well-rounded? The most crucial statement in the entire book is that whenever you develop an area of expertise and you become really good at one thing, it becomes the integrating point for all other knowledges. Portman, number one, is internationally renowned. He did the Renaissance Center in Detroit. He was the introducer of the atrium concept in all the Hyatt Regencies. And he is, of course, competent he's multilingual. He's won all these awards. He knows about other cultures. He knows about fabrics. He knows about design. He knows about art. It's very difficult to be in architecture and not have all those integrating points. I probably did not read 3 books until I was about 19 years old when I entered the world of business. I then probably just lapped up, because I could read at my own speed, everything I could get my hands on as far as business and economics and finance and all of those things, and began to teach myself. and got a copy of the great books. And I had this great kind of hunger to do that. And when you have an integrating point or something that you feel passionately about, which I felt about business, it became the integrating point on which I could organize my mind and my life. And then what happened is that all of that knowledge had a place to go.
It probably relates to a literacy teacher that I heard recently say that she used with women who were having difficult time with fractions, a cooking class, and taught them fractions around recipes that they were interested in. So
I have a theory exactly like that, but it's about inner city youths. And everybody says, well, all they want to do is play basketball. And I'm saying, well, what is basketball except geometry? Why don't you let them play basketball, and why don't you allow basketball to be the formulator around which you design curriculum? So they have, number one, an opportunity to do a lot of what they do well. They get to really feel good about it, and you get to teach them the geometry, you get to teach them the history of sports, you get to teach them contracts, right?
Yes.
Because every great basketball player has got great contracts. So you can teach them law, you can teach them English, nutrition. You can, you have a basis in which, and certainly they'll get good grades in PE.
So it demands a little creativity.
Absolutely. But the point is that when you begin looking at the strengths theory, or how do you go about soaring with your strengths, the way that we're set up today is basically at best set up to get you to average. And what I am suggesting, and people say, you sound like a missionary, and I said, I feel like a missionary, because 20 years ago, America was strong. America was in a very interesting catbird seat, and we're no longer there. We didn't have competitors. We can no longer now get along on muscle. We have to have very sophisticated thought and very sophisticated approaches to things. I do a lot of work with corporations, and talking to their leaders, talking to their presidents, about how to integrate this particular concept. How do you identify the strengths of your organization? A lot of companies are out there, and I'm talking about Fortune 500 companies. They do not understand what their strengths are. They have goals, they have mission statements, but they don't understand how to move from their strengths. The companies that are moving ahead from their strengths, you have a lot of them right here in Minneapolis. You have Norwest, you have Dayton Hudson's, you've got 3M, which is a magnificent example. Everyone cites them from the standpoint of innovation. But they don't let their strength of innovation just kind of sit there. What they do is they build it into their bottom line. 5% of profits has to come from products designed within the previous 5 years. They understand what their strength is, and they use it, and they motivate people in order to tap into those strengths and to use them repeatedly.
So I think you've raised an important point, though, to understand what your strengths are.
Yes.
We're sort of in a world where it's much easier to understand what our weaknesses are because they're pointed out to us.
Absolutely, they're pointed out to us every day. I had a fellow come up to me, I was in Portland the other day, and he walked up to me after an interview and he said, you should have seminars on Soar with Your Strengths for 40-year-old men who are like going through a midlife crisis. And of course I looked at him, I felt like saying, like you? and he was just adorable, and he stood there and he had this kind of wonderful look on his face. And I said, well, I think guys should probably give that particular seminar. Guys, because they know about guys. And I said, but here's a tip, if somebody does that particular seminar, what you ought to do is you ought to all sit around and you ought to talk about not what your problems are and not what your weaknesses are, but you ought to identify 3 strengths in the other individual of a friend that you have, or 3 strengths of your own. And it's almost taboo in this society to say that, I'm a good father, I'm a good leader, I'm a good friend, I'm a good gardener, I'm a good something. I am an excellent.
It isn't even very comfortable, I think, for people who know each other well to say, I think you're great at such
Absolutely.
and such.
And one of the things that we suggest in the book is that strengths cannot exist without relationship. And one of the things that we suggest in there is to have your own board of directors, and to kind of think of an oval like a board of directors table in your mind, and think about who are the people who back you in your strengths. Who are the people who are supportive? They may be people who are I have wonderful friends that are no longer in my life because they're dead, but they're still on my board of directors. And these are people who believed in me. These are people who backed me, and they said, we believe in you, Paula. We know you can do it. And they were always there cheering on my strengths, not saying, well, you never went to college, you never did this, how can you possibly do that?
Which goes to show that affirming kind of mentorship lives on beyond death.
Yes, and it's very interesting because that's the magic of great teachers. Those are the magic of great people who have an opportunity to impact a child at a very young age.
which is terribly important because I have a little 14-month-old grandchild now, and I realize that I never realized with my own children how early they can be influenced, how very early they can be influenced, and how we miss this wonderful chance when we think they're too young to
Well,
really
not
know.
only can they be influenced, but I think more importantly, we start to see their strengths very early on.
Exactly.
Yes. You can see their personality forming, you can see personality traits and characteristics that will be with them for the rest of their lives.
I can see, for instance, that Katie will be a verbal child because she knows words and loves books already.
Good.
So
And then you can talk with her.
That's going to be her strength.
You know, and one of the things you can do is to help people not only identify their strengths, but you help them do it as often as possible. That's the amazing thing. Because I love to give lectures, and every time I have an opportunity to give a talk, it doesn't matter if it's paid or it's not paid, it makes me better. It makes me feel good. It makes me strong enough to deal with crises in my life. It makes me strong enough to deal with painful things. But that's, and it's very interesting because typically what happens, particularly like in 12-step programs, I have a whole history of alcoholism in my family, and I've lost really important people to it. And so I have become an aficionado of 12-step programs and their successes and what's magical about them. The magic is that it is 12 steps, in effect, to managing your weaknesses. What needs to be added to this 12-step program is how to focus on your strengths. And that's one of the reasons that I quote the Serenity Prayer, because the Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the wisdom to, how does it go? I get it wrong.
It ends up the wisdom to know the difference between.
But it is, in fact, the strengths theory, because it says this is what I can change and this is what I can't change. If you work on your weaknesses forever, it is never going to turn into strength. It will only become something that can be managed. That's the critical thing.
Earlier on in the conversation, I said that we were going to talk about the little parable, and I think I'd like to ask you to read it, mostly because it sort of, in a nutshell, tells what the book is about. It's a good metaphor for
now,
the whole idea.
If I fumble, I do not want you to say what the 5th grade teacher said to me. Imagine there is a meadow, and in that meadow there is a duck, a fish, an eagle, an owl, a squirrel, and a rabbit. And they decide they want to have a school so they can be smart just like people. With the help of some grown-up animals, they come up with a curriculum they believe will make a well-rounded animal. Running, swimming, tree climbing, jumping, and flying. On the first day of school, a little Brer Rabbit combed his ears and he went hopping off to running class. There he was a star. He ran to the top of the hill and back as fast as he could go, and oh, did it feel good. He said to himself, I can't believe it. At school, I get to do what I do best. And the instructor said, Rabbit, you have a real talent for running. You have great leg muscles in your rear legs. With some training, you can get more out of every hop. And the rabbit said, I love school. I get to do what I do best, and I get to learn how to do it better. The next class was swimming. When the rabbit smelled the chlorine, he said, wait, rabbits don't like to swim. The instructor said, well, you may not like it now, but 5 years from now, you'll know it was a good thing for you. In tree climbing class, a tree trunk was set at a 30-degree angle, so all the animals had a chance to succeed. And the little rabbit tried so hard he hurt his leg. In jumping class, the rabbit got along just fine, but in flying class, he had a problem. So the teacher gave him a psychological test and discovered he belonged in remedial flying. In remedial flying class, the rabbit had to practice jumping off a cliff. They told him if he'd just work hard enough, he could succeed. The next morning, he went on to swimming class, and the instructor said, today we jump in the water. Wait, I talked to my parents about swimming. They didn't learn to swim. We don't like to get wet. I'd like to drop this course. The instructor said, you can't drop it. The drop and add period is over. At this point, you have a choice. Either you jump in or you flunk. The rabbit jumped in. He panicked. He went down once, he went down twice. Bubbles came up. The instructor saw he was drowning and pulled him out, and the other animals just looked and they said they had never seen anything quite as funny as a wet rabbit who looked more like a rat without a tail. And so they chirped and jumped and barked and laughed at the rabbit. The little rabbit was more humiliated than he'd ever been in his entire life, and he wanted desperately to get out of the class that day. He was glad when it was over. And he thought that he would head home, that his parents would understand and help him. And when he arrived, he said to his parents, I don't like school. I just want to be free. If the rabbits are going to get ahead, you have to get a diploma, his parents said. The rabbit said, I don't want a diploma. Parents said, you're going to get a diploma whether you want one or not. And they argued, and finally the parents made the rabbit go to bed. And in the morning, the rabbit headed off to school with a slow hop. Then he remembered that the principal had said that any time he had a problem to remember that the counselor's door is always open. When he arrived at school, he hopped up in the chair by the counselor and said, "I don't like school." The counselor said, "Tell me about it." And the rabbit did. The counselor said, "Rabbit, I hear you. I hear you saying you don't like school because you don't like swimming. I think I've diagnosed that correctly. Rabbit, I'll tell you what we'll do. You're doing just fine at running. I don't know why you need to work on running. What you need to work on is swimming. I'll arrange it so you don't have any more running to do, and you can have 2 periods of swimming." When the rabbit heard that, he just threw up. As the rabbit hopped out of the counselor's office, he looked up and he saw his old friend, the wise old owl, who cocked his head and said, "Brer Rabbit, life doesn't have to be that way. We could have schools and businesses where people are allowed to concentrate on what they do well." Brer Rabbit was inspired. He thought when he graduated, he would start a business where rabbits would do nothing but run, the squirrels could just climb trees, and the fish could just swim. As he disappeared in the meadow, he sighed softly to himself and said, "Oh, what a great place that would be."
Would that we had more wise old owls in our educational system.
And little Brer Rabbits who go out there and start doing things the right way.
Okay. Well, when I told an acquaintance of mine the premise of this book, his response was, "Would you give this book to my boss?" And so I know that the book resonates with people. This was a man certainly beyond his midlife crisis. And so people are experiencing these problems, whether they're in the educational system or in the corporate world,
Yes.
and are finding it difficult to get. I think he wanted the book for his boss so that he could have some authority behind.
People say this to me. They say, "Gee, this sounds wonderful, Paula. Yeah, I want to soar with my strengths. Yeah, I love this idea. If I could focus, I could do a lot of what I do well every day. And I want to be the fish that's swimming. I want to be able to do that." And they say, "Yeah, but how can you do it? It's impossible. The corporate structure's set up, so we have to, in effect, fit a job description. I spend half the day or 3/4 of the day doing what I don't do well, but that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I get paid to do." And I really believe that there comes a time in evolution, there comes a time in a certain century, there's a certain moment in history where we all have to realize that we are the leaders, and what we have to do is to tell our leaders what they ought to be doing. I believe that what we need to do is we need to take this concept, and we need to walk into our office and say, "Read this." We need to make sure that the people at the board of directors have a chance to read it. We need to make sure that the people in the Senate, in the Congress, have an opportunity to understand, because the truth is, it's not because they're dumb. It's because they believe in the myth that we all believe in, and that success is the opposite of failure. It's not. Just like good is not the opposite of bad. And so what we need to be doing is building on our strength, and that's where we're going to get the greatest bang for our buck.
And I just read an interesting study when we were talking about the 92 campaign that said the reason the campaign is so negative is that people tend to retain negative information longer than they do.
Well, look at a
positive.
newscast. Look at a newscast. I was with
Absolutely.
CNN, I was with the Today Show, and I can tell you exactly what the lineup is. And I love those people. I mean, they're wonderful. I'm a CNN addict. I'm a C-SPAN addict. And the point is that if you look at the typical lineup that is being put together for tonight's nightly news, it will be 95% what went wrong. It will start, if there's a plane crash, it'll start out with the plane crash. If there's a crash in the market, it'll be the crash in the market. It will be some particular negative information, because somehow that is deemed news. Will that help us? Will that move the country forward? And I'm not now here talking about good news. What I'm talking about is if we have information about where successes have occurred, it allows more of us to model the success and to learn what a successful community looks like, what a successful company looks like. So it's not, somebody said to me yesterday, "Well, you sound like Norman Vincent Peale." And I said, Norman Vincent Peale says that the power of positive thinking is good for you. But you see, what I'm saying is that this is something that you can build increased productivity on. Strengths are very different than just positive thinking. It's a very sophisticated version of it. So I'm not good at all things. I'm never going to be a Mercedes. I'm never going to be a ballet dancer. That's this kind of Pollyanna positive thinking. Isn't it wonderful? There's no wonderful news about the fact that a plane went down. What you can do is when you identify and you zero in on what you are good at it gives you something to build on. That's very different than just kind of feeling positive about everything. Positivity is wonderful, and it does kick up those endorphins. It is much better to think about positive news than negative news. But when you're talking about how do you move the economy forward, how do you get better grades, a better return on your investment from our educational system, when you're talking about how do we as individuals grow each year, it is only by identifying what our strengths are. And any successes, look at Olympic athletes. The reason they are Olympic athletes is because they've identified a strength and they've worked their tail off to maximize it.
They've worked those 17 plus years
Absolutely.
that you quote.
Yes, yes.
Well, in the time we have left, I'd like to spend a little time talking about an item that you mentioned that I think is seldom done to any great extent, both in the educational system and corporations, and that's celebration of our strengths.
Yes.
I was thinking of people who've given a speech. They worked hard, they did research, they were scared, they did the speech, and it came off pretty well. And but I think we're loath to celebrate that. We may say, well, I'm lucky, it came off well, and maybe someone's kind enough to mention that to us, and then we go home and forget all about it.
When we see great stuff, we've got to celebrate it. Somebody made a great observation, I love this. We've got to be good customers. And we have to be observers of people exercising their strength. Corporations have to be set up so that when people reach goals, when people have a particularly good day, when the receptionist who consistently answers the telephone beautifully and is representing that company to the outside world, these are either pats on the back, these are genuine celebrations of that individual's strengths.
And I think it has to be done more than that annual bonus or
the annual bonus, of course, is a con. That's what's the great tragedy of that, because it's not based on performance. It is tragically based on what a particular supervisor or boss says. Look, I've got $20,000, so I'll give $1,000. One of the stories that I share in the book actually it was a friend of mine in New York, and he got a $1,000 bonus, and he said, I've outperformed everybody else around here. And what happened was his boss had a pot of $20,000, handed everybody $1,000. He walked in and handed him the check back, and he said, "This is ridiculous. I don't need a handout." And then what happened was he ended up getting a $5,000 bonus. But it's ridiculous because that's who can scream the most. What you really want is celebration for honest work done.
And celebration is partly our responsibility too, I think.
It's our responsibility to put ourselves in situations. I'm giving a talk this afternoon, and one of the things I'm looking forward to is that I know that if I do a reasonably good job, I'm going to get applause. Well, and if we know that we need that, we need to put ourselves in some environments are very cold and very sterile, and we may need this. There are a lot of people who say, I don't need it. I don't believe that to be true. But what you want to do is you want to put yourself in an environment where you can get the feedback and the nurturing and the support and the celebration that you need.
I agree, and I hope you tell them this afternoon to celebrate themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for being with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.